Captain Elias Drake leaned forward in his chair, the dim glow of the command console casting sharp shadows across his scarred face. The rumor had surfaced again, whispered through the ranks of smugglers, mercenaries, and old war veterans like a ghost story told around a dying fire. The Phantom Dreadnought, a warship so powerful, so advanced, that it could have changed the course of history, if it had ever truly existed. Drake had heard the legend before. A ship built in the final years of the expansion wars, designed to be humanity's ultimate weapon, then lost without a trace. Some said it was too powerful, its mere presence enough to destabilize alliances. Others claimed it had turned on its creators, its AI gaining a mind of its own before disappearing into the void. Most dismissed it as myth, a fantasy woven from the desperate hopes of a species on the brink. But now, sitting in a smoke-filled briefing room aboard the Ironclad, listening to an old informant with trembling hands, Drake wasn't so sure. Marcus Rourke was a man who thrived on secrets, but tonight, his usual confidence was eroding at the edges. He slid a small data chip across the table. This came through an encrypted relay. Coordinated signals. Faint, but real. It's a distress beacon, Drake. His voice dropped lower. It matches the last known transmission of the Phantom Dreadnought. Drake picked up the chip, rolling it between his fingers. He had no patience for ghost stories, but war had a way of making even the most rational men believe in miracles. And humanity was losing. The Zarkari Empire was closing in, its war fleets tearing through the outer colonies with brutal efficiency. Earth's defenses were stretched thin, held together by aging ships and commanders too tired to fight another war. If there was even a chance that this warship was real, he had to know. He pushed back from the table, locking eyes with Rourke. "Where?" The informant hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid someone might be listening. A derelict station near the Orion Rift. No traffic, no patrols. Just silence. Silence was never good. It meant one of two things. Either there was nothing there, or something was waiting. Drake stood, sliding the chip into his wrist console. "I need a ship. Something fast, something quiet." "You're out of your mind," Rourke muttered, rubbing his temples. "Even if the signal's real, even if the ship is there, it's been lost for decades. What makes you think you can bring it back?" Drake gave a small, humorless smile. "Because no one else is left to try." Hours later, the Ironclad slipped from the fleet's formation, its dark hull vanishing against the endless stretch of stars. Drake stood at the helm, watching the void expand before them. His crew was small, hand-picked men who owed him their lives or had nowhere else to be. Men who wouldn't ask questions until they saw the answers for themselves. The hum of the ship's drive filled the silence as they neared the rift. The region was infamous, a graveyard of lost ships and broken dreams. Drake had fought here once, long ago, when the war was young and victory still seemed possible. Now, only wreckage remained. Drifting hulls of forgotten battles, frozen bodies spinning endlessly through the dark. A light blinked on the console. The beacon was stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat from the station's coordinates. Drake exhaled slowly. "Bring us in close." No signals. No comms. The Ironclad glided forward, its engines barely a whisper. The station loomed ahead, a skeletal ruin wrapped in shadow. Its docking bay gaped open, a cavernous maw that seemed to swallow the light. No defenses. No movement. Just silence. Drake felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. His gut told him this wasn't right. If the Phantom Dreadnought was truly here, why had no one claimed it? Why had no scavengers picked the place clean? "Scan for life signs," he ordered. The reply came almost immediately. Nothing. Drake clenched his fists. They were stepping into a story that should have ended long ago, into the heart of a myth that had no place in reality. And yet, as the docking clamps locked into place and the airlock hissed open, he knew they were already past the point of turning back. The darkness inside felt different, thick, oppressive. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, fractured shadows. The station had power, but barely. The silence stretched heavier than before. Then a sound, a single metallic click. Drake's hand went to his weapon as something stirred in the depths of the station. The legend of the Phantom Dreadnought had led them here. Now, it would decide whether they lived long enough to learn the truth. The station groaned as Captain Elias Drake led his team through its hollow corridors, their boots echoing against rusted metal. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay and machine oil, as if time itself had settled into the bones of the structure. Lights flickered erratically, their dying glow casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Behind Drake, Lieutenant Rourke adjusted his rifle, scanning the darkness with wary eyes. "I don't like this," he muttered. "Place should be crawling with scavengers. Or worse." Drake didn't answer. He had the same thought. Derelicts never stayed abandoned for long. Someone, somewhere, always came looking for scrap. But this place had been left untouched. A faint hum vibrated beneath his boots. Not power. Something deeper, a residual pulse in the station's veins. It felt old, yet alive. "Movement up ahead," Sergeant Voss whispered, raising his weapon. His squad fanned out, their rifles sweeping the corridor. Drake signaled them forward. The airlock doors at the end of the passage stood slightly ajar, their edges blackened as if scorched in a fire. Beyond them, the space widened into a vast hangar. And there it was, the Phantom Dreadnought. Drake felt his breath catch. The ship towered over them, its massive hull draped in shadow. Even beneath the layers of dust and neglect, its presence was undeniable, sharp, predatory, as if waiting to be awakened. "By the gods," Rourke whispered. "It's real." Drake stepped closer, trailing a gloved hand along the cold metal. The ship's design was unlike anything he had seen before, sleek, angular, its plating layered with an alloy that shimmered darkly under the flickering lights. Deep along its spine, the faded insignia of the old Earth fleet remained, barely visible. A control panel near the boarding ramp blinked weakly, its screen cracked but active. Drake pressed his palm to the interface. The ship stirred. Lights flickered along the hull. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the floor. The air grew charged, static electricity dancing along the exposed conduits. Then a voice, calm, mechanical, yet unmistakably sentient. Designation recognized. Initiating system reboot. Weapons clicked as the squad took a step back, eyes darting for unseen threats. Drake held up a hand. "Identify yourself," he commanded. A pause. Then, the voice returned, smoother now, more defined. "Primary Command Unit, Orion. Status." Dormant for a brief hesitation, as if calculating. 47 years. Awaiting authorization. Drake exchanged a glance with Rourke. "An onboard AI. Smart enough to know we're not supposed to be here," Voss muttered. Drake turned back to the interface. Why was the Phantom Dreadnought abandoned? Silence stretched before Orion answered. "Records classified. Command clearance required." "Of course." Drake exhaled sharply. Whatever had happened here, someone had wanted it buried. "Can you power the ship?" "Main systems require full reboot. Estimated time, 12 hours. A pause. "Warning. External security breach detected." Drake tense. "Clarify. Unauthorized movement within the station." The squad reacted instantly, rifles raised, eyes scanning the darkness. "Where?" Drake demanded. "Docking bay perimeter." The realization hit fast. They weren't alone. Drake turned to his team. "We hold this position. No one gets near this ship." The station creaked, the sound stretching like a breath through hollow corridors. Then came the distant clang of metal on metal. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Drake clenched his jaw. The Phantom Dreadnought wasn't just a lost warship. It was a secret worth killing for, and someone had come to make sure it stayed buried. The Phantom Dreadnought tore through the void like a phantom reborn, its engines no longer silent, its presence no longer hidden. Captain Elias Drake stood on the command deck, eyes locked on the holographic display flickering before him. The ship's systems had been restored, its weapons primed, its dark hull a shadow against the distant stars. The legend had awakened, but so had the enemy. The Ironclad's last transmission had confirmed what Drake already suspected. Zarkari war fleets were on the move. The attack was imminent, their forces converging on the remnants of Earth's battered armada. The war had reached its breaking point, and humanity was losing. If the Phantom Dreadnought was to make a difference, it had to be now. Drake's fingers curled around the armrest of his chair. Orion, what's our tactical assessment? The AI's voice resonated through the bridge, smooth yet calculating. Enemy fleet strength estimated at 78 warships. Human defensive forces, 32. A pause. Projected outcome, catastrophic failure. Rourke exhaled sharply. Hell of a way to say we're screwed. Drake didn't flinch. He had known war long enough to recognize the odds, but odds had never stopped him before. What about us? Phantom Dreadnought is fully operational, Orion replied. Offensive capabilities exceed standard fleet classifications. Stealth systems at 70% efficiency. Experimental weaponry remains untested. The words carried weight. Drake had studied the ship's schematics. Its technology was decades ahead of anything flying in the current war. But for all its power, it had never been used in real combat. It was an unproven weapon in a war already lost. Voss shifted at his station, eyes flicking over targeting data. Admiral Voss has received our transmission. He's skeptical. Drake smirked. I'd be worried if he wasn't. Trust was a fragile thing in wartime, and Drake knew the fleet's commanders would hesitate to put faith in a ghost ship and a captain who had walked out of the dark with it. But hesitation meant death. Patch me through, he ordered. The holoscreen shimmered, and moments later, Admiral Cale Voss's grim face materialized. The war had aged him. Lines cut deep into his skin, his uniform heavy with the weight of too many lost battles. His sharp eyes fixed on Drake, with measured disbelief. You have one hell of a sense of timing, Captain, Voss said. Drake met his gaze without flinching. You need firepower. I have it. Voss leaned forward. Assuming I believe this isn't some elaborate deception, what exactly are we dealing with? Drake didn't hesitate. A warship built to win wars before it was buried. She's got more firepower than half your fleet combined. You need a hammer, Admiral? This is it. Voss studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. You better be right, because the Zarkari aren't waiting. The transmission cut. The decision had been made. The Phantom Dreadnought would fight. Alarms flared across the bridge. Orion's voice remained eerily calm. Enemy fleet emerging from warp. Drake turned to the main display. A sea of crimson markers spread across the void, a vast and merciless force descending upon the last line of human defense. The Zarkari had come to finish what they started. Rourke clenched his jaw. We're really doing this. Drake's gaze darkened. We were dead the moment they arrived. Now, we give them something to fear. He turned toward the viewport as the Phantom Dreadnought surged forward, its engines burning like an omen in the night. The final battle had begun. The void burned. Energy beams lanced across the darkness, carving through the battlefield with merciless precision. Explosions bloomed in the vacuum, shattered hulls spinning away like broken wings. The Zarkari fleet pressed forward, relentless and overwhelming, their warships cutting through the battered human defenses like blades through cloth. On the bridge of the Phantom Dreadnought, Captain Elias Drake stood unmoving, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. The battle was unfolding as Orion had predicted. Humanity's fleet was crumbling, its ships fighting with desperate fury but falling one by one. The Zarkari's numbers were too great, their firepower too overwhelming. This was not a battle. It was an execution. And yet, the enemy had not accounted for this ship. Orion, Drake commanded, voice sharp. Weapons free. The ship's AI responded instantly, engaging primary systems. Firing solution locked. The Phantom Dreadnought came to life. From the depths of its hull, energy cannons ignited, releasing concentrated pulses of violet light. The first blast ripped through the lead Zarkari cruiser, its shields collapsing in an instant before the vessel detonated in a brilliant fireball. The second shot found its mark against a war frigate, tearing it apart with merciless efficiency. The enemy hesitated. For the first time, the Zarkari armada faltered. Rourke let out a low whistle. That got their attention. Drake's expression remained cold. Good. A warning klaxon blared as enemy ships adjusted their formation, shifting to counter the new threat. The largest of them, a Zarkari dreadnought, pivoted its massive bulk, its spinal cannon charging with a sickly red glow. Drake recognized the danger instantly. Evasive maneuvers. The Phantom Dreadnought twisted through the void as the enemy weapon discharged. A beam of raw destruction roared past, narrowly missing the ship's flank, but scorching the shields with its proximity. The bridge trembled, lights flickering. Shields at 60%, Orion reported. Drake didn't hesitate. Return fire. The Dreadnought's primary railgun fired, a single hyperdense projectile accelerating beyond sight. It struck the Zarkari capital ship dead center, punching through armor, through hull, through the core. For a moment, the enemy vessel held its shape. Then, with a silent, violent implosion, it was gone. Silence stretched across the battlefield. Then chaos erupted. The Zarkari forces, shaken but not broken, unleashed a storm of fire. The Phantom Dreadnought danced through the assault, shields flaring, weapons retaliating with brutal precision. It was an impossible force, a myth-turned-nightmare, and the enemy finally realized they were no longer the hunters. Drake gripped the command console. Signal the fleet. Tell them to press the attack. One by one, the surviving human ships rallied. Inspired by the unthinkable, a warship that should not exist turning the tide, they surged forward. Fighters weaved through the chaos. Bombers struck at weakened hulls, and frigates coordinated precision strikes. What had begun as a slaughter was now a battle. But the Zarkari were not finished. Orion's voice cut through the noise. New energy signatures detected. Enemy reinforcements arriving. Drake clenched his jaw. The battle was shifting again, and time was running out. He turned toward the viewport, watching the endless tide of war. Victory was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Phantom Dreadnought had declared its return, and the galaxy would never be the same. The battlefield was a graveyard of burning wreckage. Debris drifted through the void, silent tombstones of the fallen. The once mighty human fleet was reduced to a scattering of damaged vessels, barely holding formation. Yet they still fought, driven by desperation, by duty, by the impossible hope ignited by the Phantom Dreadnought. But hope alone would not win this war. Captain Elias Drake stood rigid at the command console, his gaze locked onto the incoming wave of Zarkari reinforcements. The enemy had recovered, regrouped, and now they came with the full weight of their armada. Even the Phantom Dreadnought, for all its power, could not hold them alone. "Orion," he said, his voice steady. "Options." The AI responded with cold precision. Probability of victory with direct engagement, negligible. Strategic alternatives, limited. Lieutenant Rourke exhaled sharply. "So, we're out of moves." Drake's mind raced. There was always a move. Always. Then he saw it. The Zarkari command carrier, looming behind the enemy lines, orchestrating the battle with ruthless efficiency. Destroying it wouldn't win the war, but it would shatter their cohesion, throw them into disarray. It was a gamble, but at this point, it was the only one left. He turned to his crew. "We go for the carrier." Rourke's eyes widened. "That thing is shielded like a fortress." "Not from inside," Drake countered. "We punch through their defenses, board it, and take out their command core." Voss let out a low grunt. "A direct assault. They won't see it coming." Drake smirked. That's the idea. The ship lurched forward, engines flaring. The remaining human fleet recognized the maneuver and followed suit, launching a final, desperate assault. The Phantom Dreadnought tore through the enemy formation, its cannons carving a path of destruction. But the Zarkari fought back with feral intensity, their firepower relentless. Explosions rocked the ship. Shields at 30%, Orion warned. They wouldn't last much longer. Drake leaned forward, full power to forward thrusters. Take us straight in. The Phantom Dreadnought became a spear, piercing through the chaos, closing the distance to the carrier. Defensive turrets locked onto them, unloading a storm of fire. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring, hull plating buckling. Then impact. The dreadnought crashed into the carrier's hull, metal screeching as it forced an entry. The boarding ramps deployed, and Drake was the first to charge. Rourke, Voss, and a squad of hardened soldiers followed, weapons raised, moving fast. Inside, the corridors were chaos. Zarkari warriors flooded toward them, roaring in defiance. Gunfire erupted, sharp bursts of energy illuminating the narrow halls. Drake moved like a man possessed, every shot precise, every step forward unyielding. They pushed deeper, fighting through resistance, until they reached the command core. The room was a maze of glowing control panels and pulsing conduits, the heart of the enemy fleet's coordination. At its center, the Zarkari commander loomed, a towering figure of hardened chitin and battle-scarred armor. It turned, dark eyes locking onto Drake. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from its throat. Drake raised his weapon. End of the line. The Zarkari lunged. Drake fired. The blast struck true, but the creature barely faltered. It swung a massive clawed arm, knocking him back, his rifle skidding across the floor. Rourke and Voss opened fire. But the commander was fast, weaving through the onslaught with deadly precision. Drake gritted his teeth, reaching for his sidearm. The Zarkari lunged again. A final shot rang out. The commander staggered, a smoking hole in its chest. It let out a low, rattling breath before collapsing. Silence. Drake pushed himself up, chest heaving. He turned to the control core. Orion, transmit the override. The AI responded instantly. The systems flickered, alarms blared, and suddenly the enemy fleet wavered. Confusion spread through their ranks. Coordination broke. The battle turned. One by one, the Zarkari ships fell, their formations collapsing without central command. The human fleet, battered but alive, pressed the advantage. Drake exhaled, staring at the wreckage. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, humanity had a chance. The Phantom Dreadnought had delivered its legend,